You're listening to the LA Football Podcast.
What's up, Los Angeles? Welcome to the LA Football Show. Thank you all for tuning in. This is your Chargers edition. Got some, some exciting, if you want to call it, or interesting news regarding our Chargers. I'm Ryan Dowry, joined as always by the madman, Jamal Madney. Thank you all for tuning in. Make sure to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcast or on YouTube, and obviously LAFBnetwork.com. But Jamal, what's up, brother? How we doing on this fine, rainy Thursday evening?
It's been surprisingly rainy, Ryan, and you and I have kind of talked about this a little bit. LA giving Seattle and London a run for its money. I mean, the ebbs and flows here. It got low 40s. You said it in Pasadena was high 30s. I mean, my goodness, where am I living? This is get me out of here. What's happening over here? This is not LA. I grew to love. I mean, this is global warming is getting too much.
I know that's what everyone understands. Like, it's called global warming, but it affects the cold front as well. It's deceiving to many. But yeah, I'm wearing a long sleeve thermal and a cardigan, big cardigan guy, by the way, become a big cardigan guy. And I wore a jacket out too. I'm like, what is going on here? I'm like at the Swiss Alps or something heading to the office this morning. But anyway, Chargers keeping things interesting with some changes. Show is always brought to you by BetOnline. Make sure to check out betonline.ag. Use our promo code BELIEVE, BLAAV. Gets you 50% welcome bonus. Tell them the guys at the LA Football Network sent you. But Chargers keeping things interesting and confusing at the same time. We're not going to spend a ton of time. This is going to be a shorter show because there's not a ton of news to break down. We want to get into heavy free agency stuff next week because we're, 2 weeks away, and I will be most likely at the Combine next week, so we'll have stuff to talk about then. But defensive coordinator Ronaldo Hill, Jamal, decides to leave the Chargers, go to the Dolphins, where he, learned from his protege, Vic Fangio, who's the DC there. But he's demoting himself, essentially, from DC to pass game coordinator over in Miami. Then the Chargers reportedly promote Derek Ansley to defensive coordinator, which, great, makes a lot of sense. He's a rising star. But then a day later, interview two other potential coaches to become the defensive coordinator. So either the reporting was way off, either the Chargers don't know what the hell they're doing. What do you make of this whole situation?
It's odd, Ryan, and I think that it's sort of uniquely Chargers in terms of how they've been approaching some things recently. But I think at the crux of it, Ryan, whether it is reporting, whether it is organizationally in terms of their strategy and how they want to do things, I think ultimately this comes down to Brandon Staley double downing even more as the defensive coordinator of this team. And much in the way we think of Andy Reid as the offensive coordinator of the Kansas City Chiefs, partially why it's been such a challenge to really understand what Eric Bieniemy's value is in terms of to a franchise. I think similarly, Brandon Staley, understanding that year 3 is a make it or break it year for him. He wants to control this defense with the level of intimacy that a DC would. And now that he has Kellen Moore, by all regards and indications, a top 5 offensive mind in the league, I think he can take his foot off the gas much more in terms of oversight, in terms of stress, in terms of day-to-day management of the offensive side of the ball, and just get even more involved on the defensive side, knowing A, he's got a great guy on the other side of the ball, and B, I got to make it work this year. I'm out of excuses. Otherwise, I'm going to be out of a job. And so I think part of this is whoever is going to be the defensive coordinator of the Los Angeles Chargers is very much like the royal family in England. I mean, this is really a ceremonial position more than anything else, than anything functional. And I think certain guys really want to have that ownership and responsibility because the NFL is such a competitive league. You're always looking for that next promotion, that next job. You're trying to build your resume. You're trying to win. And I think some guys are out there like, hey, I'll take the cush. I get to be called defensive coordinator. I won't make coordinator money, but I don't have the coordinator stress, and I'll take it. And I think they're sort of juggling through some of these names right now, because I think that the defensive coordinator of the Chargers and the offensive coordinator of the Rams are going to have more free time than the mayor of LA. And I think the two of them should be having dinners a few nights a week. They can be going and checking out the comedy clubs, really checking out some of the nightlife scene in LA, go lay out on the beach, because neither of these guys are going to be doing too much in 2023.
Yes. Yeah, we'll see Derek Ansley, Mike LaFleur, and Karen Bass all at the Comedy Store out in Hollywood. That'll be great. That'll be a great time. Yeah, it's reporting aside, I think the move is interesting from Ronaldo's Hill perspective, because I don't think it hurts the Chargers at all. Let me say that. But I think it's interesting from Ronaldo Hill because he's going from DC title of doing, I'm not saying he's doing nothing. We're obviously speaking at hyperbole here, but DC title of not doing a whole lot because Brandon Staley has been running the defense. He's been there. He's been more the, practice personnel guy. But now he's going to be the secondaries coach and pass game coordinator for Vic Fangio, who certainly is going to have him do even less than he was doing. So he's almost maybe getting a cushion, maybe got a pay raise to do less work. Maybe that's what it is for him. And from the Chargers perspective, I think it's one of those where Derek Ansley is a rising star in coaching. Tommy Donatel, also a rising star in coaching. So it was one of those, like, if we look at these three coaches, if we're going to lose one of them, we'd rather lose our DC, who is arguably not doing much, as opposed to these two guys that are really rising stars that maybe challenge Brandon Staley in thinking and thought process. And I'm all speculating here, but I know they're widely respected, Ansley and Donatel, that is. And they're able to implement them higher up in the coaching, anarchy, not anarchy, but tree, and give them a little more responsibility without taking anything away from Staley. So interesting, but I think at the end of the day, it's not really changing a whole lot for the Chargers. It's more of just like interesting Twitter talk.
It's interesting though, right? I mean, where you are defensive coordinator of the Chargers, and then you choose to go be, essentially a secondaries coach in Miami. Look, you're going from LA to Miami, so both great places to live. It's not like you're sort of downgrading there. But are you doing less, or are you doing more as a secondaries coach in Miami? I mean, what does that really say about the tree under Brandon Staley too, right? I think it speaks to maybe just how hands-on he really is, and moving forward, what that kind of means for him. And I think, look, in times of crisis, it's fight, it's fright, or it's flight. And I think what's really happening here with Brandon Staley, because make no mistake, after you blow a 27-point lead in the playoffs, it is a time of crisis in his career as a head coach of the Los Angeles Chargers. The question now is, he's going to fight, and he's not running away because he's back, so flight is off the table. You don't become a head coach in the NFL being a scared person. So it's all fight at this point in terms of the response. But how do you fight? How do you feel most comfortable fighting? You get back to your basics. You get back to the thing that gives you most joy, where you have your most competence, where you're most comfortable, where you have your most confidence. And that is the defensive side of the ball for Brandon Staley. So I think this is really a move to say, hey, we'll bring in some consultants to challenge my thinking every now and then. But if I'm going down swinging, and I'm going down on my terms. And I think it's a very similar thought process, certainly not with the level of urgency, not with the level of crisis with Sean McVay with the Rams, where, hey, if I'm going to walk away from this game, I'm going to walk away with one more year going back to my true essential self, doing the thing that I love the most and the thing that gives me greatest differentiation. And I think that's where Brandon Staley is going. So I think this is more to me, Ryan, a symbol, a proxy of the level of urgency that Brandon Staley feels going into the 2023 season. And in that regard, that should make Chargers fans very excited, because you're going to get the best version of him. You're going to get the guy that's going to go swinging for 23 because he knows it's now or never. And I think if that level of urgency translates to the offensive side of the ball with Kellen Moore, to the personnel, to the culture of the team in that locker room, this could be a very special year for the Chargers in 23.
Well, I think you hit a really good point there. What's exciting about Staley right now and where this organization is yes, everyone remembers the 27-point blown lead. That's horrible, bad taste in your mouth. When we were on Radio Row, we talked to a lot of players and we talked to a lot of former players. We had Sean Merriman on, we had Ryan Leaf on, but we talked to current actual NFL players, not even on microphone, but just like on the side, just hanging out. And almost all of them unanimously were like it was fascinating what Brandon Staley and the Chargers did, like to get to the playoffs. And yes, they blew that lead. And so they were and these are players praising this guy and this coach. And the fact that they still accomplished that and he shook up his coaching staff this much, firing his offensive coordinator, moving on from linebackers coach. Now his DC leaves, which seems to be mutual or whatever. I'm sure there were conversations. The other one that we haven't talked about that just happened on Thursday, they're parting ways with their head trainer, Damon Mitchell, who's been with the organization for 24 years. So the fact that all the turmoil they had all year and they still were able to make it to the playoffs, but the fact that he is willing to shake things up so much, saying essentially like what you just said, knowing that he's on the chopping block, but also knowing that he doesn't want to be insanity, right? Like, okay, we tried this. We got some success, but it wasn't the success we promised. It wasn't the success that we told fans would get. It wasn't the success that this roster should have achieved. If I'm a fan, that's exciting. That the fact that they're moving and changing things and rotating doors and doing different things. And you know, I just mentioned it, but the Damon Mitchell parting of ways, like this is a respected guy. He's been there forever. For those that don't know, this was not the guy that punctured Tyrod Taylor's lungs. So it was someone on his staff, but it was not him. So no one assumed that. But seeing all the injuries they've had, the Chargers have been known for years for having these injuries. Brandon Staley came in, said he would change that mantra in his first year, ultimately did. It was a very healthy Chargers team. And then this year ultimately regressed back to the mean. And making this change now shows that, you know, he knows what's expected of him, whether it's from ownership or whether it's from the fan base or whether it's from being in a city like Los Angeles. And I wouldn't be shocked, Jamal, if Brandon Staley and Sean McVay maybe had a few drinks this offseason and sat down together and said, like, what are you doing? What am I doing? Like, I feel like these are two guys that when you look at Sean McVay's tree and you look at LaFleur, you look at Kevin O'Connell, we can go down the list. These were like buddies of Sean McVay. When you look at Brandon Staley, they're never talked about as being like buddies. But whenever they come up in conversation together, the respect is always talked about. The respect they have for one another. And I'm not saying that like there was bad blood or anything, but like Sean McVay hired Staley because he blew him away in terms of terminology and defensive scheme. They had a phenomenal year together. Their coaching pedigree meshed really well. And in 1 year, Brandon Staley was able to trampoline off of McVay and get a job. So the respect is mutual there. I would not be shocked at all that both guys were like talking a bunch. They both live in LA still. They're both close in proximity. They both have really like changed their coaching staffs exponentially since this offseason. Both very different outcomes that they had this year, but both similar in terms of what they've done now this offseason. And I think you should be excited if you're a Chargers fan because this is a different Brandon Staley we've seen the last 2 years.
Yeah, Ryan, I completely agree. And what's interesting is that what I love about both of them is just this element of self-awareness that they're both exhibiting right now about what is it going to take for us to kind of get back to what made us successful and the willingness to change not only themselves, but those around them. And I think that, look, I have never played in the NFL, never came close was light years away from making that even the remotest of possibilities. So I am not going to sit here and say that my opinion means more than what NFL players have said about how great the Chargers did given the adversity that they had. But I do believe that the Chargers got way too much credit for making the playoffs, because at the end of the day, yes, the injuries were significant, but look at that schedule, Ryan. They didn't beat a team with a winning record all year. And so I commend Brandon Staley for actually leaning in more to realizing that, hey, we kind of got a little lucky optics-wise of making the playoffs, and I can sort of, we can sort of cry a little bit as the team that maybe should have gotten more. But deep down, I know as a numbers guy, as an analytics guy, as someone who's very, very logical and pragmatic, we got really lucky with the schedule. And if we had kind of more of an average schedule, we wouldn't be making the playoffs. And so for him not to rest on his laurels and go make these changes, I think really shows a level of seriousness despite kind of making the playoffs, given the schedule that they had. So I think it sets up for a very compelling year for the Chargers. We've got peak Staley, hopefully. We're going to have peak McVay across town. Should be a great year in LA football.
Yeah, and a lot of big conversations around free agency. There's a lot of talk around Keenan Allen. Obviously this is the first year, Jamal, I can remember in quite some time where the Chargers are really up against the cap. Like, it seems like for the last 4 or 5 years, they've had a lot of cap money to play with, and whether they use it or not, they've had it there at their disposal. And this is kind of the first year where they're in like the Rams situation where they got to get creative. And now let's see if they do get creative and get out of their old way of thinking. And if Brandon Staley can kind of push this new line of thinking, which he has done already in these first 3 weeks of the offseason, if he can push that now to upper management and say, hey, if we want to win, we got to think differently. We can't be the Chargers the last 10 years because we haven't won any damn thing. Like, there's no Super Bowls in this organization. We can't keep doing the things the way we've been doing them. We got to think ways like maybe the Rams think. They won one. Maybe like the Chiefs think, maybe like the Patriots think. Like, we have this, whether you think he's top 4 or top 8, we have for sure a top quarterback in the league, and we got to do things to make everything around him work. And yes, we've talked about a lot, Jamal. Obviously, yes, he needs to elevate things too. But if we're not doing things in an organization to put him and me and us in a situation to win, then what the hell are we doing? Like, why are we pretending to be an NFL franchise, and why the hell do we move to LA? Because it's not going to last very long here in LA if we're not willing to take risks and do things outside the box of thinking and do things differently than we have done for the last decade. And I think, and maybe I'm stretching here, Jamal, but I think what Brandon Staley's done, and obviously everyone knows I love Brandon Staley. I think he's a great human. I think he's a great man of integrity. I think he's a great coach in mind. But I do think what he's done the last 3 weeks have shown that he's shifted the way the organization has done things, because they don't do things like this. In the Anthony Lynn era, in the Mike McCoy era, you could even go back to the Norv Turner and the Marty Schottenheimer era. Like, they don't do things like they've done the last 3 weeks of all these coaching changes after making the playoffs. I know obviously Schottenheimer was fired after going 14-2, but outside of that, it kind of just stays the status quo a little bit. So if I'm a Chargers fan, I'm excited for the future. Now we got to see things go down in free agency and see what happens, because there's a lot of questions that need answered, and there's a lot of big things that need to be addressed. But anything else you want to add? I think it kind of wraps up with these little things. Thank you all for tuning in, Bolt fam. Let us know what you think. Hit us up on Twitter at LFBJams is Jamal, at Ryan Dyrud, LAFB is myself. You can text us. Just text the word Bolts to 31032. Everyone have a great weekend. We'll talk to y'all next week.
You're listening to the LA Football Podcast.